Hello, we're back.
Hello, Mover.
Show. It's like it always catches us off guard. We're always surprised that the show is actually happening.
If only there was like a timer that could go to 0 or something that would show us.
Yeah. Well, Gonky, we've got a guest today. Very special. Alf, Major, retired, Dan McWilliams. And we always love retired majors because you did it right.
That's what. That's correct.
That's how we only hang out with retired majors around here. But welcome to the show. It's good to have you. You have flown a lot of cool things in the Canadian Air Force. Our first Canadian guest.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Bonjour.
Good, eh?
Bonjour and hello.
I love
it. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Gonky, how was your weekend, man?
It's busy, man. We were, yeah, that's me. No, oh no, dude, is that Mike Tyson?
Yeah.
Jeez Louise.
Yeah, we've had a few Gonky Tyson memes.
It's like I feel like I'm Blue Air and I'm being punished for my mistakes.
Look at that.
Yeah, Mover and I were busy this weekend. We were supporting
and defending the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Attempting to, but yeah, so those pictures were taken. I'd never seen a C-130 drop before. And
yesterday.
Yeah, and they did one and they invited, the front office out. So
just the cool kids.
Rode out there in a car and got to watch them drop a 600-pound pallet. So it was pretty cool. Yeah, but some pictures were taken of me and I knew that you would somehow get your hands on them and I would have to just endure whatever.
My sources,
Thanks, Witty.
Listen, I have my sources and I won't divulge where I get things. But we had a good weekend. Drill, still working this morning, so got some stuff done and here we are. But that's not about us right now. And hello, Doug. Welcome back. Good to have you again.
Thank you.
Hope you're doing well.
Yep.
Perfect. All right. Well, let's get into the.
Did you want more?
No, that's pretty much it. That's all. But Skid's here. Skid's checking in.
Awesome.
But so what we'll do, we've done this before, and we think it's a pretty good format. Alf has graciously agreed to join us to talk about his story for part of the show, and then we will invite him to stay, and if he's got the time. And we're going to talk about some kind of current events and stuff. A lot of stuff happening in the world today, financially, militarily, pretty much. It's the old meme. I'm tired of living through all the once in a lifetime events because I keep living through once in a lifetime. I'm like on my third or fourth stock market crash in the last couple of years. So it's good. if you're bad at it, every day is a stock market crash, though.
That's true.
Anyway, Alf, dude, I'm going to start this the way I always start this is you had a great career, but how'd you get the aviation bug? How'd you get started flying? Like what was the spark?
This airplane.
Wow.
Okay.
This was my dad's airplane.
Oh.
He started out in the wrong place in the second seat in CF-100s and Voodoos as a navigator, but then they opened up for cross-training to pilots. So he, when I was about 8 or 9, we were living in Saskatchewan, and he was going through pilot training all over the Canadian prairies. And then when I was 12, we moved to Germany. And of course, step off the bus, and there's 104s with black smoke trails and this howl as they go into the break. And that was, and then he said, okay, kid, you're going to cut your hair and you're going into Air Cadets. Well, in the 70s, you want me to cut my hair? So totally cool.
Not cool, Dad.
No. So went into Air Cadets, and as part of that, he there were a few cadets a year that were able to go flying, and I got up in a T-33 in the back seat when I was 14 years old.
Wow.
Whoa.
Wow.
My dad was flying, so
Flying you?
yeah,
We flew
took
you
off.
in a T-33?
Yeah, it was part of the Air Cadet thing. So we took off from Baden and flew down to Lahr, which is about 30, 40 miles south, roughly, and did a touch and go in Lahr, and then back to, we met an F4 coming the other direction. He was going down to Bitburg along the Rhine. And so Dad said, hang on. We 5G turn and did a little 180 with him. And
That is awesome.
went back to Baden and landed, and it was a 20-minute flight. And of course, there was the hook. You know, there was no choice. I had to be a fighter pilot after that. So that's what got me going in the whole thing.
If you stop the story right there,
Yeah.
it's just we're already cool. Like 14 years old. Like I need to move to Canada. Like Canada sounds way cooler than you never. Well, maybe back Maverick took Penny Benjamin flying, so it is possible.
Allegedly.
Well, that's so. Is the Air Cadets kind of like the Civil Air Patrol equivalent in Canada? Like, what is it? Is it like a paramilitary, like junior ROTC? Like what?
Yeah, it's like junior ROTC, I think.
Okay.
So were you? So it was a government program.
Yeah.
Okay, like a lead into pilot training, sort of.
Well, this is high school.
Not really.
Right?
It was just voluntary. Show up once a week, do parades, learn survival, learn about aerodynamics and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Of course, if you were not lucky enough, like if you were in an Air Cadet squadron in Ontario or Alberta or something, you were basically a long way from anything. But because we were in Germany on a fighter base, I got to ride around in the back of self-propelled howitzers and APCs and, fire machine guns on the range and do stuff like that. So
at 14
now.
At 14?
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to do that at 41.
Yeah,
Let's do that now.
But I want to drive race cars like you, Mover. So
Oh, hell yeah. Hey, we can always, we can get you down in a race car with the battle scarred folks. So that's high school. So did you go, is there an academy? Did you go to like the military academy or what happened after that?
I ended up going to what's called the Royal Military College, RMC. And it's, think of West Point, only tri-service. So we had, like, when I was at RMC, our hockey team, I was the announcer for the hockey team. I'm nowhere good enough to play on the team, but I got to, fill the water bottles and stuff like that. So they took me down one time to West Point and another time to USAFA. And they're similar colleges. And we used to beat West Point and lose to USAFA all the time.
Wow.
So I did that 4-year degree, and then I went off to training in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan.
What's your degree in? Did you get like engineering, or was it just like I get the first degree because I want to go fly?
It's applied science. So I did a couple of years of mech eng, and then when I did my first phase of pilot training on little bug smasher, turns out I was nervous all the time. I thought I was going to fail every single day. And 50%, like the first day of school,
Yeah.
You sit down, the course director, there's 30 of us in the room. He says, okay, look left, look right. One of these people is going to be gone in 2 weeks. And that's how it was. So made it through that. And then when I got back to college, my dad called me. He never called me. And he said, hey, guess who my new student is on the F5? Because he was back in Cold Lake teaching on the F5 at that point. And I said, I don't know. He says, Mark Holman. I said, he was my instructor in Portage on the Musketeer. And he goes, yeah. He said, you were the best student I ever had on the Musketeer. You do fine in your wings training. So I said, good. So I went into my squadron commander, said, I don't want to do engineering anymore. That's too much work. More spare periods.
Oh, dude.
Did you get, you said you were a nav, right? You crossed over from, or
Dad
was that
was.
just your dad was? So you went straight to be a pilot.
Yeah.
Out of the academy.
Mm-hmm.
And so was that a pretty competitive process as far as like, were you worried, or did you pretty much know, hey, I'm going to do this? And
well, because I had the feedback through my father, I was pretty confident. But basically, we had 3,500 people a year, small numbers in Canada, of course, compared to the US, but 3,500 people a year would apply to be pilots. And at the end of the day, about 3 years later, after all the training, about 175 would graduate.
so I just got for the first time, an audience question via text, Dick Tracy style, on my watch that says, ask him his RMC college number and the year he graduated.
Tell him he owes me beers.
If the last two of the college numbers match, I'll owe him a lot of beer.
A lot, yeah. 12584. 1980 is when I graduated.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, moving on to the flying portion of this. What was the primary trainer back then?
The Tutor, which is the same airplane the Snowbirds fly.
Okay.
So it's Canadian built in Montreal by Canadair, and it's like when I would fly down in the States. There was one day we were over Las Vegas somewhere, and we basically had a huge headwind trying to get to Alameda on the coast. And we were at 43,000 feet because we tried to get above the jet stream.
Oh,
and
geez.
the ground speed was like 160 knots. So the controller says, what is a T114 anyway? I said, well, I was going to say, well, it's kind of like a tweet that hasn't been stepped on. And it's pressurized and it goes higher and faster. But the other guy said, no, I got this. And he says, well, you know your SR-71? And the controller goes, yeah, nothing like that.
Perfect.
That was a great little training jet. It was, side by side. There was a couple of times, like I had one girl who had a really hard time with steep turns, and she'd be fine at first. And then all of a sudden she'd start like going up and down, like 500 or 600 feet at 60 degrees of bank. And I said, Bernie, put your visor up. I want to see. I looked at her eyes, and she's staring at the vertical speed indicator and chasing it with the 7-second delay. So it was good for that. You could see what the student was doing. It was really good training airplane.
So how did it work in Canada as far as track select? Like, when did you know what was next, or was there like a big competition, like fighters, heavies, helos, and class ranking, and kind of how did that work out, and where did you fit in and all that?
Yeah, it was. It's changed quite a bit recently, but back then, at about 2/3 or 140 of the 200 hours in the course, at the 140-hour choice or point, they had a helicopter selection. And I think we had 29 students to start. At that point, we were down to 25. 7 people went helicopters. And I was looking down the pike and saying, geez, I really wanted to go fighters, but they were closing down the F-101 Voodoo training unit because we were transitioning to the F-18. This was 1981. So the F-5 squadrons were full. The 104 was going to run one more course, maybe. And so it was looking really, really tough to get fighters. And the course director said, look, if we get 1 or 2, we'll be really lucky. So I thought, maybe I want to go tactical helicopters because that sounds like fun. It's not driving a big, ugly airplane like Gonky's Hercs, for example. Didn't mean to paint you with that brush.
No, Alf. Listen, no, that's welcomed on the show.
Yeah.
See, told you.
Oh boy, yeah, you got it. That's revenge porn right there.
Yeah.
Wait.
Look, dude, in the fighter pilot world mover, all things come back. So we'll just.
But as an aside, a quick intermission. Alf, your book is available on Amazon, and all of these stories are in there, correct? Like this is just a small taste of what they can find in the book. The link is in the description. Supersonic stories, what it's really like to be in the cockpit.
Thank you. Yeah. In fact, some of the stories I'm telling right now are in another book that I'm busy writing called Tudor Tales, and that's going to come out very soon. But
Awesome.
That's my early days, and then once I got onto the F5, that's Supersonic Stories.
So was the CF5 was the F5 was after the Tudor as far as the training pipeline?
Yeah, because what happened was I ended up. I didn't go helicopters. Finally, thank you. I avoided that problem. When I graduated, there was another guy with myself. We tied for the best pilot as a flying trophy. And it was fun because my dad presented me my wings on the grad parade.
Oh, that's awesome.
And turned out he was actually posted there to the same unit his last tour. So he showed up as an instructor flight commander when I was a young student graduating.
Wow.
So he pinned my wings on me, and then big surprise, they announced the names for the flying trophy, the City of Moose Jaw trophy. So Pierre Blais and I march up and accept the award. After the parade, Dad says, "Get over here." So he brings me over to the big trophy, and he turns it around and says, "Look," and there's like Flying Officer McWilliams. He won the trophy when he did his course.
Wow.
Kind of fun that way.
That's awesome. That is so cool.
It wasn't a lack of skill or anything, but there was one fighter position, and I came in first in flying, but sort of academics I didn't really care that much, and leadership didn't care much either.
That's for nerds. That's all
why
for
I'm a
nerds.
retired major.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was another guy who was number 2 in everything, so he got the fighter slot, and I ended up instructing as a first tour IP.
What did he go to, Alf? What did he end up getting?
104.
Okay, so he was okay.
Yeah, which was what I wanted to do. So he went to Germany and flew 104s while I was teaching people how to change airspeeds and maintain their heading.
So they have a FAPE. They have like a FAPE program in the Canadian Air Force, just like the U.S. Air Force.
Yes.
First assignment instructor pilot. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't call it that. We call them pipeliners, but it's the same thing. So I did that for 3.5 years, and then at the end of that, then I went on to Cold Lake and did my fighter training.
So the CF5, obviously, it's like a souped-up T-38 in comparison. But did it have like the HUD and all that by then, or that was later like CF5D?
Yeah, that was about 10 years after I flew it, I think. Just in fact, what we do in Canada is we upgrade an airplane, then we sell it, give it away to Turkey, or retire it. I think they ended up in Botswana, of all places. The F5s were great.
Good place for it. Yeah, they need that. Wow. So CF5 would then be, so you had the leading edge root extensions, bigger motors. So it's probably a fun airplane to fly, right? I mean, pretty maneuverable, fast, looks cool.
Yeah, it was so easy to snatch on 7 or 8G without really thinking about it. It's you had to really watch it. Like, it was so fun on the Hornet, you just like pull and you don't care. But with the F5, we had a little tone, but in the heat of the moment, you can pull right through the G limit tone. And I never overstressed it. I was lucky that way. But we had compressor stall problems all over the place. It was just terrible. The Tudor has the same engine as the F5, but no afterburner, the J85. And so the afterburners, they had fuel control unit problems. And when I started my course in November, the temperature never went above -30 Celsius for the day. And it went to like -45 overnight, every single night for 3 solid weeks. It was brutally cold. And below -30 with those fuel control units, they would almost always compressor stall. And we had like 5 aircraft out of a 37 aircraft fleet that had modified MFCUs. So they were able to do afterburner takeoffs at -30. So out of the 20 people on the course, if you were scheduled on the first launch, maybe you might fly. If you're on the second or third launch, we'll go to the gym and play badminton or squash because you're not flying. So
How
I flew
many
like once a week
layers?
for the first 3 weeks of that course.
Yeah. How many layers of underwear do we have to wear for this? 'Cause this sounds like,
We
I
had-
remember when it got 50 in Tyndall, and I was like, okay, well, I've got 2 layers here and a jacket. That's 50
Yeah, when-
Fahrenheit.
It was funny landing in, say, Luke Air Force Base in the middle of the winter on a cross country, and the marshaller was wearing a toque, and you go, "Come on, dude."
It's
Alf, did you get in the F5? Could you hot refuel that thing?
We didn't. Geez, I don't know if you could, because the fuel thing, I guess you probably could, but we never did.
I was just thinking, to keep it warm, right? Like,
Oh yeah. No, it was okay if you didn't let it sit for too long, it'd be okay.
okay.
But we wouldn't let them cold soak for 3 or 4 hours, because then you'd like be blowing hydraulic lines all over the place.
And
Wow.
did you guys have a mix of single and 2-seat, or mainly just single seat F5s?
Mostly 2-seat and some singles.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was lucky. My first solo in the F5 was in the single.
oh,
nice.
yes.
It's funny because my instructor had briefed me, because the way well, here I'll use my little training aid here.
Nice.
The T-38 is basically almost an F5. Well, this seat in the back is where the instructor sits, and the student sits in the front. Well, in the single seat F5, this back seat is where you sit as the pilot, because it's there. That's where the back seat is. That's where the single seat is. So my instructor had said, you'll see on landing, you need to have the nose a little bit higher, and just so round out a little bit more before you touch down. So, okay, I got this. So, I come in my very first overhead brake, raise the nose a little bit more. Oh boy. Not quite look back. Yeah, the wings are okay. No struts poking up. It was like a Navy landing, I guess.
Gonky standard. Go
Yeah,
on.
so
Right.
So I did a little better after that, but it was really fun to fly a single seat jet.
Did they chase you? Did your IP chase you, or was it just
No.
see you later, have fun?
It was, in fact, I did the solo check one day. The weather was crappy the next day. There were no airplanes. It was 3 days before I flew my first solo. And it was actually a cloud layer. And because we had our wings, and I had 2,000 hours at the time, they said, oh yeah, just go ahead, penetrate the cloud, go up to your stalls and stuff and aerobatics above the cloud, and then come back down. So they were pretty permissive with that.
That was your first solo in the F5?
Yeah.
How'd you have 2,000 hours? What were you? Or
Well, the tutor, I would fly about 500 or 600 hours a year as an instructor.
Yeah.
wow.
Sometimes,
So was it?
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Sorry, I was gonna say, is the F5 program more like the Navy, where it's combined advanced and introduction to fighter fundamentals, like tactics, dogfighting, dropping bombs, or is it more like the Air Force, where you had to go to a separate school, IFF? And were you doing tactical stuff in that jet, or was that somewhere else?
Yeah, the very first bit of the course was the conversion to the aircraft, and that was about 30 hours, and then there was 60 hours of tactics after that. It was a 6-month course. And actually, in the book, I describe how early in the course, right after I was finishing the conversion portion, I was supposed to be starting the tactical phase, all excited about that. And they had a big meeting and said, hey, we found some cracks in the airframe and the wing spars. So they grounded the fleet. They closed 2 operational squadrons. The place I was supposed to go, they closed. So I got delayed a year. And so I went off and flew the T-33 for a year, for 6 months, actually. And then I went back and redid the entire F5 course.
When you say you went off and flew the T-33, was that operational, like an operational squadron, or?
They call it utility. It was, we did a lot of NORAD target stuff. And
Okay.
it was real hardship. We'd have to go down and go to Miramar for a week and do a NORAD exercise. especially on Wednesday night. It was really terrible.
How'd you like flying the T-33?
It was classic. I'd flown the very first jet I flew in was a T-33. So it was neat to go into it. It's quite the beast. It's got some quirks, like flying it at 40,000 feet is like this. You're on the end of a pin here, and it's got a dead spot in the stick in the middle. And then it's got boosted ailerons. So the wing would drop a tiny bit. So you'd try to correct it a bit more. And so there's a lot of this going on at first. But it was
no autopilot.
Oh boy. Yeah. Actually, it was a funny story. I don't think I mentioned in this, but I used to tell my students when I was teaching them about mock tuck. How in an airliner or something, you'll go too fast and you have a high speed stall. So I'd flown the Hornet for several years at that point. I'm going from Bagotville to Goose Bay to go and hold the alert for NORAD in Goose Bay. So I'm in the back of a T-Bird, and one of my friends, the T-Bird guy, was doing the same job I used to do. So he's taking me there. He's tired. He says, "Hey, Dan, you've flown a bunch in this airplane. You just get us there." So, okay, fine. So I'm flying from the back and having a good time at 25,000 feet. And the weather's beautiful. And I say, "Hey, Matt, let's go down, do some low level." He says, "Okay, sure." So we got a clearance to go down and cancel IFR. So what I do is I just go inverted, pull down to about 45 degrees, and then just go down. And I just suck the throttle back a little bit. And there's this little voice in front says, "Watch your Mach." And I go, "Hey, nobody lives here. What's he worried about? We're way below supersonic here. What's his problem?" And then around Mach 0.8, his nose just tucks and starts shaking and going up. And I go, "Oh yeah, I remember that number." But the T-Bird was a good airplane. It was a fun airplane. I've got another few stories, but I actually don't tell a lot of T-Bird stories in the book. I might put that in another one.
Yeah.
Well, got enough airplanes, one for each book.
That's right.
one plane per book. Well, then I guess once you finished, that's when you were part of the initial CF-18 group. Like you were one of the first there.
Yeah, you can't see it here, but I was on course number 7, CF-18 course number 7. So we, at that time, we were populating the squadrons in Europe. We had 3 squadrons in Germany. So we sent people over there because we had a NATO commitment we had to fulfill. And I was slated to go to Bagotville. So my course, I think 12 or 13 of us went to Bagotville, and then we were backfilled by a few from another unit that had been there and learned about the airplane. So they kind of mentored us when we arrived with the new aircraft. So we stood up 433 with the initial cadre on that squadron.
What is that like? I mean, new airplane, is there like this palpable excitement that, I'm about to fly the latest and greatest thing? Or what were you guys thinking about the Hornet prior to seeing it?
Yeah, it was scary because we didn't know what we were doing, really. We were trying to make stuff up as we went along. And especially because, when you guys flew them in the Navy, the water was liquid. Like, you rarely flew in really cold climates. So we found things out like when you adjust the seat pad, the rudder pedals, there's a little, that's the T-Bird, but you have a little thing, you got to hold it down, and then the spring brings them back. Well, when it's minus 30 outside and it's been parked there for 2 hours, spring doesn't do anything. So I've got my Nerf boots. They're like Skidoo boots, and they're really soft-toed. So I'm leaning forward and I'm grabbing those little lips with the toes, and I'm trying to pull this back, and it just isn't working. So you either abort the trip or you start up and you hope the heat in the cockpit does the job. And
wow.
So we developed SOPs like always leave the rudder pedals full aft, and then you could always push them, but you couldn't get them back. When it was cold, you always did a flight controls exerciser.
Oh yeah.
And you never ever do a reset with the flap switch in auto, because they would always fail, and then you'd have to go through the test group 6 or whatever and reset your leading edge flaps. So we learned all kinds of things about that. I didn't know what MMP 812 was, and we couldn't even read the maintenance monitor panel because it was in the nose. And so the tech had to go down and look at it, and then he'd come out and he'd go, okay, 8, 3 on the side, 1, 2. And then I'd have to dig out my book and, MSDRS tape, which is something it didn't have in the later lots. So then you call ops, they'd say, okay, you're good for one more flight. We've got enough space on it. Okay, good. So you go flying. But all these things that now is just old hat, or when you arrive on a new squadron, but everybody else knows what they're doing, they tell you these things. Well, we had to learn them all as we went. We did NORAD. So we had to qualify NORAD Q, and the other squadron there had been doing it for 2 years, was really anxious for us to be able to take over and do half and half in the QRA. Oh yeah, we had to learn NATO as well.
What were they flying? Sorry, for NORAD, what were you replacing at that point?
The Voodoo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the Voodoos had been phased out. One F-18 squadron showed up, 425, and they took over NORAD alert. But they did it 24/7 for 2 years before we showed up and helped them out a little bit. They only had 12 airplanes and 20 pilots on the squadron. They had to do alert for all that time. Shoestring budget equals Canada.
Well, so were you developing new tactics or using their tactics and trying to make it Hornetized? Because that's something, we saw with the F-35 when it first came out. It's like they were like, oh, Hornet Tactics will work on this thing. And then they figured out now that doesn't work.
Yeah, I talked to some of the guys, the Green Mountain Boys, a couple of weeks ago in the air show in Bagotville, and I learned a bit about that. But we used, well, NORAD is NORAD. It's pretty old and proceduralized and everything else. We didn't do a lot different, but we were able to be a lot more like the radar is way better than the Voodoo. So we didn't need so much controller assistance and that kind of stuff. But we transitioned at one point. We'd hold alert in the Maritimes, like Greenwood, Nova Scotia, and places like that, because we were doing counter narcotics, which is a new role. Oh, so
wow.
I show up in Greenwood, and I'm told, okay, there's a King Air coming up the coast. So look it up in the book, and it's like, oh boy, he doesn't go very fast. So we're trying to figure out how are we going to shadow this guy and stay behind him, at like 200 knots, waffling along like this. So we tried, one was a racetrack with the two of us counter rotating, and then another one that I came up with was we'd go 65 degrees off, just near the limit of the radar, so that you get a little bit of negative closure, and then turn across like this, 65 degrees, and then go across behind them. And that worked pretty well, actually. Yeah. So we're on the secure telephone with NORAD saying, here's what we're going to do, and this is a good tactic. And so the controller wouldn't ask what we were doing on the air.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Alp, when you guys, excuse me, when you're you said you were the 7th class at the time, did they have exchange instructors to kind of help with the transition from the U.S.?
We did. We had a Navy guy from Lemoore. Okay, and we had other exchange guys that actually didn't know much. They'd been trained in Lemoore, but they had previous experience.
Okay, so like a lot of your IPs had like 100 hours in the plane.
Yeah.
Wow, man, that's crazy.
Oh,
wow.
yeah.
You said you were at Cold Lake
for 2 years. Yeah, because I was supposed to be there for 6 months, then go on the F5 to an operational squadron. I ended up 2 years, like a F5 course, T-33, F5 course, F-18 course.
So I don't know how, by the time I got there, right, you're talking 2008, 2009 to 2012, but Canadians would always come down. So that was, they were basically snowbirds for in the Hornet, right? Because they would come down, do an exercise with us out of Homestead. We would fight them exclusively for like 2 weeks. Yeah. And they would get out of the cold. Did you guys ever do stuff like that or go to Homestead or anything like that back then?
Telling the budget gods, and it was that there were operational reasons to do that. It wasn't because of the weather, you see.
Of course. I lost my mind. Yeah, of course. Yeah. So you had to fight the mighty Viper. So obviously joint training.
The Makos in Homestead.
Mm-hmm.
There was Tyndall, there was Eglin that we'd go to all the time. From Bagotville is where we'd go. And I actually got a Viper ride.
Did you really?
Going up to was it something park, air to ground
Avon
range?
Park.
Avon Park, yeah.
Avon Park. Yeah. Yeah.
That was a fun ride.
Yeah.
There was one point where I got a little bit scared, and this is where the guy in front mumbled something, and we go 15-degree dive, headed for the ground. I'm thinking, oh, we're getting pretty close on this run. And then there's this huge explosion beside my left ear. Oh, that's the gun. he was strafing. Like the gun in the Hornets in the front. It just, makes little noises up front. No big deal. But I didn't hear we're going for a strafe run, because I was getting to the point of thinking, if this guy doesn't pull out, I'm going to help him out here. And then the explosion happened. I thought, boy, we're in real trouble now.
Did all the insulation go floating around by you? I mean, even when I was flying it, when you'd shoot the gun, all the insulation would come out through the vents and everything, and you'd snow in the cockpit.
No, I didn't notice that, but I was probably just too scared.
You'd have it all over your flight suit and stuff. Oh, you strafed today? Yeah, I see you strafed today.
But over in the front seat was the, I guess, could you see any flames or anything at night when you're shooting out of your peripheral?
No, not NVGs, maybe. No, I mean, typically no, because you're so fixated here. There's
field of view of NVGs is like that.
Yeah, it's scary enough because you're like, why am I pointing at the ground at night? This is scary in a F-16 with no canopy bow. But we had the Canadians always come down every year, and it was always so much fun.
And they go vertical.
They always go vertical up.
Yeah.
And I loved it because a Block 30 Big Mouth is going to keep climbing. And, they'd come over Aux going, whoa, because they didn't think we could do the double Immelman. And every time we'd prove that we could do the double Immelman.
Yeah, that's just because they didn't know what they were doing. But I don't pretend to be a BFM god, but I will tell you that went down to Homestead, did some 1v1 against one of the regular USAF guys, because it was regular unit at the time, I believe. And I basically kicked his ass, because I'd go uphill, and then he would sort of come uphill and then and have to go down. And so I just keep going, and then, doing the rudder thing, try to get the pipper on him. Okay, now I can shoot something.
Alf, when it's -50 out, I think any airplane can go up twice.
Yeah,
right. All that super dense, dense.
But that was Homestead. But then I went up to Bagotville a week later, and I'm flying against the National Guard guys from Burlington, and the guy just basically had me for breakfast. A guy named Duck had been flying for 1,000 years, F4s and everything else. And I just said, okay, I thought it was good, but no.
What was he in?
Fight a Viper.
Was he in F-16?
Yeah.
Yeah, because back then, if you're talking active duty Homestead, that would have been the Andrews time, back when it was still F4s.
Before Andrews destroyed the place, yeah.
Yeah.
Around 1990 or so, 89, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I don't know when they got the Block 30 Big Mouth, but so what is the CF-18 versus the A+ or the Legacy Hornet? What's the difference?
Yeah, well, actually, I got involved with it a lot because when I got out, I was still flying the Legacy A, and then I was involved as a lead SME for the upgrade for the simulators. And so I did a lot of flying in the sims and a lot of the design meetings and stuff like that. Basically, the radar was hugely improved. We went to APG-73 from the 65, and the APG-65 we had didn't even have altitude and range while search. You basically had to, and track while scan didn't work worth beans. When I got out, my first job in the civilian world was to run a group of radar engineers, and we put altitude and range while search into the CF-18. So that actually helped a lot. But the APG-73 track while scan now became usable. And there's an AMRAAM. That's a big change. We had some smart weapons before. McDonnell Douglas, now Boeing, told us we couldn't do it because they wanted to sell us all the avionics upgrades. But some of our smart engineers actually jacked up the mission computers, added in some cards that increased the throughput and everything else. And so we stripped out all the air-to-air stuff, like all the AIM-7 support and everything else. And we could now fire Maverick and drop some laser guided bombs. And so they use those in Aviano. So the aircraft that we were flying 2 years after I got out in Aviano against, like in the Balkans, were dropping smart weapons, but they couldn't do air to air because we didn't have the capacity in the computers.
Alf, I have to ask you, did your smart engineers also modify the TAMPS machine?
Champs machine.
The TAMPS. Did you guys have we called it the TAMPS machine? It's the mission planning computer from like 1970, and you had to like you could never have any spaces, so like everything was words with underscore, like one continuous. It was a pain. It was a pain, but we upgraded to Jumps computers, which made life. And I was just curious if Canada had those.
We didn't have TAMPs, and in fact, there were all kinds of little mini projects going on, and we had one that was just terrible. You had to digitize the map, and it took longer to use the machine than it did to just do it the hydraulic way, and then type it all into. Well, we did get the bricks to do that, but that was with the upgrade. So all kinds of stuff happened after I left.
So you didn't have a brick when you started? Like there was no mission planning?
I'd have my little data card, and I'd just be plugging stuff in, and it would take, from walking out to the airplane, it would take 30 minutes before we get airborne because you're just doing all this stuff.
Did it have the fishbowl center display with the little the paper? What is it made of, Gonky? The little moving map that they could put in that was never right?
Microfiche. Yeah, the microfiche.
Yeah. Did it have that? Was it the fishbowl in the center?
It made all kinds of noise. It would, and sometimes it would be faded out in certain areas, like the local area. It was always faded because it was burnt through. It saved me a couple times finding a target after I'd been tapped on a target run, but and it was unreliable too, because one of my buddies actually died in a NORAD exercise because of that. Because the aircraft had been flagged because the moving map had jumped a cog and it was 5 miles off, and he'd forgotten that. And his father was a fisherman, and he was on the west coast out of Comox on Vancouver Island, and he went below min safe altitude trying to spot a fishing vessel in distress. And he said, "Oh, a little gap in the clouds, I can get down there." So down he goes, looking at his moving map, nothing but water and into a mountain. So it was really sad.
Obviously no GPS, just INS, right? To back up.
We didn't have GPS at the time either. We just had INS. You'd air refuel across the Atlantic, and we'd do a TACAN update as we approached Shannon, Ireland, and it'd be like 6.5 miles off, and all you'd done was straight and level the whole way.
Yeah.
Did you have an ILS? Like, because weather's kind of a factor in Canada, so that
was
maybe
one
Hornet.
Yeah.
So
I know
you had a
you
civilian
had
one.
a carrier ILS, right?
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. Hornets, when I flew them, they did not have an ILS, but they had the ILS for the carrier, but we didn't have anything for the field.
But that's one thing, we had a VOR ILS, so we did ILS approaches all the time. And
would it give you the needles in the HUD so you could fly it through the? Was it HUD certified?
It was so easy. You just you put the velocity vector 3 degrees down, and you get the needles right on top of the velocity vector. It was just a piece of cake. So you do. When it was 2 o'clock in the morning and I'd been scrambled and hadn't had any sleep, coming back to really crappy weather, I'd tell the controller I want a radar approach, and I'd do the precision approach radar with the ILS as a backup, and it was just super easy. So the auto throttles were the same too? Would they hold on speed AOA? Same, yes.
Oh, dude, that's an airliner.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
When I started instructing in the Challenger, it was like, just fly it like an F-18.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, what is your, scariest moment in the Hornet that you could think of?
Yeah, when I was on the course in Cold Lake, it was a 2v1, so 2 against 1. So my instructor was leading me against one bandit, and the idea was free and engaged tactics. So whoever managed to tangle with the bandit at the merge would be engaged, and I would get free. So I get free 4 or 5 miles from the fight. They're just little dots over there. So I carve around, and I saw what I thought was the aircraft turning away from me. So what I saw, though, was the false canopy. I saw the false canopy, and I thought it was the real canopy.
Oh, because they paint the canopy at the bottom. Yeah.
Yeah. So I saw one like this and the other like this, and I thought they were turning away from me. So this is happening up here. So I'm in VAC, vertical acquisition. Take one quick look down at my fuel quantity because I knew I was getting close to bingo. I look back up, one goes by. So I turn, and then wait a minute, and the other one goes by even closer. So that on the air combat maneuvering instrumentation, I think it was like 140 feet miss. It was that
Wow.
So
Yeah.
that's that scene from Top Gun Maverick where he splits the formation. You did that.
close.
You in the vertical instead of
Yeah.
Alf, you just validated the paint job works.
Oh, it
Yeah.
certainly did. But, it was funny. Well, that wasn't really funny, but my instructor, Mike Hoke, said, okay, knock it off. How about we go home? So we just flew back. Nobody said anything. Landed, went over to ACMI, and Hoke said, let's just go to the last engagement right now, because we wanted to see that one. There was just silence in the room. Even the old former voodoo guy who's running it said, holy shit, like that's something. So that was probably the scariest.
Yeah, that's like the equivalent of driving home from work with the radio off because you just had that kind of day and you're just nothing on. You're just like, I just need to get home right now. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Well, I imagine in your debriefs, kind of like in the first thing you talk about safety. So it's like, let's just go straight to the.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I didn't fail that trip, but we all learned a lesson there.
Yeah.
Alf, would you say, I mean, you've probably done a lot of joint stuff, Air Force and Navy. Would you say the Canadian Air Force with the Hornet kind of tended to be more like the U.S. Air Force or the U.S. Navy in, as far as how they employed the Hornet?
I think more like the Navy. We didn't really work a lot with the Navy. We mostly saw them at Red Flag and places like that. And then, of course, with the F-14, with the Oceana and those places, we'd fight against them sometimes. Not so much against Hornets, but I think within the U.S. Air Force, the Eagle guys had their own culture and ways of doing things, and I respected them a lot for when they did what they did, but I sort of didn't really get along with the way that they thought. Whereas the Viper guys, we went down, like one of my last deployments, we went to Gulfport, Mississippi, did some air refueling up down there.
Yeah.
And some Vipers came from Springfield.
Cool.
I think it's the place the Simpsons come from. I think it was Ohio. I think I said Ohio.
Yeah.
So we had a good time with them. Because at that point, then they had AMRAAM, so we were actually tables turned. Before it used to be they had AIM-9s and we had AIM-7s, but now we were the ones doing the silly bugger stuff to try and avoid getting killed. So I think the Viper guys were the closest to us in terms of philosophy and the way they did things.
Yeah.
U.S. Navy F-18s didn't really see them much, but I think they also did a lot of like our aircraft got beaten to pieces by fatigue life, because basically you take off and fight's on. You're right there. You're not doing 100-mile transit out to a cap and then doing something like that around the ship and doing a lot of orbiting, waiting for fuel or to land or something. So we actually had to we stopped doing touch and goes. We just did like get a few feet off the ground, goose the throttles, and not even touch, because the landing was really basically a waste of time in an F-18. It's even 8 landings every single time.
Yeah.
So
Alf, when-
to answer the question.
Yeah. No. Sorry, Gonky, you were saying.
Alf, when did they start doing the or was it always going the exchange program? You know, they send a Navy guy, you guys send a Canadian Air Force guy, because I think that would probably have some bleed over in as far as, you know, the culture and how you operate the airplane. Were you when you were flying the Hornet, did they have the exchange program going with the Navy?
Yeah, they did, and we learned a lot from those guys. We because we'd never flown with AIM-7s or anything like that, and with a decent radar, so we adapted a lot of stuff from the Navy.
Was it always a Hornet guy, or do they throw you a Tomcat guy every now and then?
Early on, it would be Tomcat guys, and then Hornet guys eventually, because the Tomcat guys were different. They were.
How did you do against the Tomcat? You said you fought him. How did you do?
They were pretty easy. You just don't fall into their trap. You know, just like a Block 30 F-16 against an F-18. Don't fall into their trap. Fight your own fight, and you're going to be fine.
That's awesome. Was the CF-18 is a 7.5 G limit? It's not like the Finnish F-18.
No, it's not.
Right?
Theirs is a C model with a 9G limit. Ours is 7.5. Yeah.
Okay, so exactly the same. Wings folded too, like the same.
We do it to put them in the hangar. So,
oh, okay.
We actually removed the from the launch bar. We removed the motor from there to lighten up the nose a little bit, but we didn't make the same mistake the Aussies made. They removed the launch bar itself, and their nose wheels would shimmy all the time. One of my buddies went on exchange with the RAF, and his first landing, he wrote the airplane up. He said, "It's just a nose wheel shimmy." And no, Mike, that's normal. That's normal.
So from a philosophical perspective, were you more prone, if you had an emergency, to use an arrested landing because you had the Hornet hook?
Yeah,
that was easy to put up and down.
Mm-hmm. We practiced that regularly, and they always had the approach and departure end cables up, so we used them all the time.
So you do I guess it would be 5 down checks in the chocks because you didn't have a launch bar. So you do all the probe, everything, all that stuff, just like a Navy Hornet.
Yep.
Yeah. Alf, I have to ask, the spotlight.
Yes.
like I think it's the Kuwaitis and the Canadians have the spotlight, and I was curious. Number one, did it work? And did you guys use it? Like, do you guys use it on intercepts
or on each other?
We used it on NORAD intercepts and practices as well. It took a little bit of practice. Like it would go about 70 degrees left, so it would be right at the edge of your radar scope, and you could, if it was humid enough, you could see the beam headed out. But it was aimed up a little bit and a little bit ahead of the wing line. So it was pretty effective, but it was tiny. And so like if you're doing it with another Hornet where he's running along with no lights, so you're doing an intercept and you could spot him with that, but you sort of have to like move the wings around a little bit, juggle the rudders a bit. Okay, there he is. And then sort of like slide in and try not to hit him because you're getting mesmerized by that. We also forgot it a lot.
Oh, really? You just left it on?
There's a switch outside on the far left throttle, and it was just a little like a $2 toggle switch forward and aft. And there's a picture that my squadron commander was delivering an airplane to third line maintenance in Montreal, and I see the picture. He's got the spotlight on. So, hey, boss.
Did it extend? Like, did it have like an ops limit, like 300 knots? I can't, or something like that. It was just on off.
It was flush with the fuselage, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. And it went on the gun door. That's where it was installed. So what would happen sometimes, actually, they'd remove the light and put a little encoder decoder for ACMI on there for the air combat maneuvering instrumentation.
You mean it went the gun door that you would have open and inspect the gun, see the light
is in that door. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, we never had it. We didn't have it in US. Yeah. It is. Yeah. We never had it in US Hornets.
Alf, did you guys ever have with your two seat squadrons like the Marines do, where you put a Wizzo in the back and it was always single pilot?
No, we there was a guy, stay away from politics here, that a navigator on other aircraft at one point tried to buy a bunch of F-18Fs so that he could train up some backseaters and do some stuff. And no, we always operated single seat. If you had a dual, like, it was not ideal because it was a little bit short on gas, but you could use that with one pilot in it and go to war. That was the plan.
Speaking of war, you went to Desert Storm.
Yes.
Right. How was talk about that, man? I mean, the two things I'm most interested in. Number one, you were a fighter pilot in the greatest time in the world to be a fighter pilot in the 80s, but the Gulf War, what was that like? And what was it like, being part of that big coalition?
It was, well, first of all, full disclosure, I was a staff weenie in Bahrain. So I didn't get to fly. Sometimes I'd drive down to Sheikh Issa to the Marine base that was down there to go to deliver. I was actually part of the supply chain to get our Link 4 data links repaired because we didn't have a repair facility. So they'd fly in and I'd drive it down half an hour. So I'd see these Marine Hornets taxiing out loaded for bear, and I go, oh, geez, I just love to go out there. Hey, dude, you feeling tired? Can I just? But
Tap me
I
in.
saw, like, I went to Riyadh. I went to the day before the ground war started. I visited Riyadh, went to I think they called it the KOC or something, Combined Air Operations Center.
Yep.
And General Horner was there. All these other generals sitting around this table down the bottom, and there's like 400 people in this amphitheater, and they had screens with AWACS feed, JSTARS feed, you name it. It was up there showing disposition of troops, and it was like we had a little magnet board showing where the Canadian boats were in the carriers and stuff like that in the Gulf. But here we were seeing people in refueling tracks doing the thing, and I found it was like a huge red flag exercise, because the air tasking order, the first one I looked at, I went, this is a flag exercise, because it was the same format, the same information, the same breakdown, everything was, and I thought, hey, this is great. There's no learning curve here. We know what we're doing when it comes to this. We sent 26 aircraft, declared 24. We did initially caps over the Gulf. And the way they separated it was pretty easy, because they gave the Saudi airspace to the USAF and the Gulf airspace to the US Navy and Marines. And so we fit in with the USN and USMC, and there were some F-14s doing it as well. I went to the Bunker Hill we took an American Sea King, went out to the Bunker Hill, went into their command room there. It was pretty impressive how they run the air war from there. No, we didn't talk about what happened with the Iranian airliner, but that was like ancient history back then. I sat in a few conferences where what was happening is Whiskey 8, Whiskey 1, these were all the caps up in the Northern Gulf. And some of our guys would be there saying Whiskey 1. And so you have one guy hot, one guy cold doing this thing. And then two Marine Hornets would show up. And it's kind of like a little awkward. Well, how do we do this? We didn't really have a common frequency or anything. So sometimes you'd get like one Canadian hot and one Canadian and two Americans cold. It was like, so after a day or two of this stuff, I attended a meeting in Sheikh Issa. Two guys landed from a cap, and two of our guys landed from a cap, and they hashed it out, rules of engagement, when could you shoot and all that. Had my eyes open, because the Marine guys, it was like, basically, if I don't like the look of the guy, I'm just going to shoot him.
I'm not surprised.
He looks hostile. We'll figure it out later.
Yeah.
Box 3.
And our guy said, our lead looked a little uncomfortable. He said, well, I need an engraved invitation from the Queen delivered by horse carriage before I can shoot anybody, because we had really, really strict rules. And so one Marine guy said, well, if one Marine shoots, all Marines shoot. So we said, okay, we're good with that. We'll shoot too, and make up the story afterwards. But it was fun. It was good to, and I had a Navy Hornet guy and a Navy F-14 backseater who were my contact points in Bahrain. They were on the command ship that was parked at the docks in Bahrain. So I saw a lot of it, like Scud attacks when those poor guys got killed in Dhahran late in the war by the Scuds. That was like 12 miles away as the crow flies. And you could hear them go boom. We had tape on the windows and all that stuff. But I was there for 5 months, and I ran. There were 3 of us on the ops desk 24/7 for 5 months straight. So that was just exhausting by the end of it.
When did you get there? Do you remember what month?
October 23rd or something.
Of 90. Wow.
Yeah.
So before the kickoff.
Yeah, way before. And it was kind of a, I knew, like, I just looked at all of the order of battle and everything else, and like going to Shakis, it was like 98 Hornets and 26 F4Gs and all this stuff. I thought, there's no way that we're vulnerable to air attack here. And
Did you, my geography of Bahrain is not very good, but I grew up in Dhahran.
Small country.
It is a very small country, but did you see any of the Kuwaiti A4s there? And I can't remember, did they work any, did they work them into the plan at all?
I don't think they were in Bahrain. In Bahrain, there were some Bahraini F5s and F16s.
Okay.
In Maharak, which is the commercial airfield in Bahrain, and the Al Manama, there was RAF Tornadoes, the pink ones. There were a bunch of Victor tankers and a bunch of transports, but I didn't see any Kuwaitis, and I shouldn't talk about other stuff.
Yeah. I just I remember one of my dad's one of the pilots for the company. He was an old Navy guy, and he actually went over and saw some of his old students that he had trained. They were Kuwaitis that took off, fought the Iraqis, and then they couldn't land in their own country, and they they came down. I couldn't remember if it was Bahrain or Saudi. It was probably Saudi, but I was just curious.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, that's a blank. I did run into. I was sitting in a Kentucky Fried Chicken one day, and one of my old buddies from F5s was walking by in the street. What are you doing here? He says, "Oh, I'm teaching Bahrainis to fly F5s." I said, "Really?" So there were a couple. I had beers one night with him and a couple F4 guys from Vietnam that were also doing the same thing, and there was a Marine guy who had just gotten out. So it was interesting listening to their stories.
When you retired, you did some contractor work, right? Like you got out and what kind of stuff, I mean, that you can talk about, like what kind of stuff did you do after your Air Force career, and what made you decide to pull the plug?
And in the book, I tried to be a little bit not whiny about it, but basically, if the Air Force wanted you to have a family, they would have issued you one of supply. So I had been sent to the Gulf with 2 days' notice. I'd just gotten married. My wife was working evening shift for 6 months. We hadn't seen each other since we got married. I was about to get out and go to an airline, but there was a downturn around 1990. And so I'd had an interview. They said, if we hold a course, we'll hire you. And so I said, okay. And then they went belly up 2 months later. So that was the thing when I went to the Gulf. And then then I became a pension prisoner. I arrived close to 20 years service. And I was supposed to go to the Falklands, not the Falklands, the Balkans as a FAC. I got trained in an army base near Quebec City. And I learned the laser rangefinders and designators and all this stuff, and TACON and all that. So I was on standby to go for a 6-month tour as a FAC to the Balkans. And my wife said, look, this is just too much. You know, the kids are like 1 and 2 years old. And if you go away for another 6 months to another war where the snipers shoot the guy with the radio. So that was when I was coming up in 20 years service. So that's why I got out. It was,
that makes sense.
I enjoyed the job, but it was just getting to be a little bit much to juggle that with the family. So that's why I didn't go airlines right away either.
So out of your 20, sorry, dude.
I was just gonna say you landed on your feet and ended up. You said you flew. You did some stuff and flew a Challenger.
Yeah, I went to my second last tour. Like I'd arranged everything. I said, okay, this great civilian job lined up. So what I did was I created through staff work. I created a position for myself in the contractor in Mirabel, north of Montreal. So I was doing fatigue life management. I was doing acceptance test flights after you walk into the hangar and there's like parts on shelves everywhere, and that's an airplane. And then like 4 months later, I'm test flying the thing. So
that's awesome.
I did ferry flights. So it was really great. I did some part-time flying, and I also did aircraft operating instructions, the same thing as NATOPS, and fatigue life management and aircraft software, simulator software. So I was the liaison person for all of these things. And it was perfect. And then 3 weeks after I got there, they said, hey, great news, you're promoted. I said, you're going to move me, aren't you? You go, yeah. So they yanked me out of my dream job and they put me on a squadron back in Bagotville as a flight commander. So I did that, and then I got out, and then I called up the manager in the civilian company where I'd been attached and said, "Hey, Danny, could you use me?" And he goes, "Well, yeah." So they hired me like that, and I went and did a similar job only as a civvy. And then but I got bored of that. After a couple of years of that, they kept pulling me down to the main plant. CAE was a company I worked for. They made simulators, and so
still do.
they were working on a MiG-29 for an Asian country, is what they said. I think Gonky knows a lot about this.
Yeah.
And it was fun. It had a virtual reality headset, fiber optic helmet mounted display. And
Wow.
my job was to do the air combat system. So they had 2 F-16s with artificial intelligence as adversaries. And my job was to fly BFM against these two guys, these two computer players. And then, like, once in a while, I go, "Oh, wait a minute, he just turned the wrong way. It's too early." So I freeze, and I tell the engineer, I say this, and he go, okay, persistence. And then he'd plug in a 2-second delay because he was making decisions, and it was deciding something and turning the wrong way. So because by the time you make a turn and you pull, well, it takes time before that changes the physics of the situation. So the computer was assuming something else. And so I learned a lot about simulators and all that stuff, and I found I enjoyed that. And then every day we'd go to have lunch at the pub beside the plant. And there's a bunch of guys who were teaching on the Challenger business jet. And they'd say, "Come on over, when are you going to come and work for us?" So one day I did. So I taught in the simulator, and I also flew corporate with the Challenger 604 for a couple of years. And that was right around 9/11 too. So that was an interesting time to do that.
Wow.
Do you do any sim stuff now? Like, do you play DTS or like at home, or?
I'd like to. I haven't got time. I've been writing a couple books and doing other things, but
Well, let's talk about these books. I, for one, applaud what you're doing, because I've told Gonky this, and I've tried to get Gonky to start writing.
I am.
I think
I've started.
I think if you don't preserve these careers and these stories, that nobody knows the truth. And I think it's awesome that you did that. What inspired you to finally take that leap, and how's the writing journey been?
I've always enjoyed writing. I've collaborated on various books on aviation history and stuff like that, but I didn't want to write a history book. I wanted to take the reader and put them right into the cockpit. Like, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? How is it? What is it really like? And I was privileged as a kid because I saw my dad. He'd come back from flying 104s all day, and he'd sit there in his flying suit and have his coffee and talk about stuff. And Mr. So-and-so, Mr. So-and-so. Well, that was actually Colonel So-and-so and Major So-and-so. But I was immersed in it as a kid. But I would go to air shows later, and people would come up to me. They'd ask me, I won't say stupid questions, but questions that made it clear to me that they knew very little about the aviation world. And like your initiative with Make Them Tell You No is very similar to that. You're really opening up the eyes of people. Like, it's not impossible. And I learned that, when I first saw a tutor, and I was flying Musketeers, the little propeller beach sundowner thing, and, the little Coke bottle fuselage with boink, boink. And I went to a tutor in the hangar one night, and I looked inside and went, "Oh boy, I'll never know how to do this." Well, my dad said, "Look, you eat the elephant one bite at a time." And so that's what I wanted to portray, was this is how I started, and this is how I ended up. And you're not like, I think in the first paragraph or two, I say that it's a peek inside the rarefied world of the fighter pilot, and that I was by no means exceptional, but I worked with all kinds of exceptional people. And I just wanted to sort of shine the light on all of that. Yeah. I've always wanted to write fiction too, but I don't have any good ideas like you do.
I'm the opposite. I don't have any good stories, so I made them up. I'm not interesting enough by myself, so I had to make up a whole world. But no, that's awesome. Well, Alf, dude, your career is amazing. They can get your book, and the link is in the description. I encourage everybody to pick it up. And when do you think the next book will be out? Is it forthcoming?
It's I've learned a lot about publishing on Amazon. It took me a while to figure that out.
It's a whole
But
thing.
I'm hoping by Christmas to have it out, so it'll be on everybody's list.
Hell yeah, Christmas reading. Well, we've got some
Chat.
Doug actually brought up a good point. If you wish, what's the story behind your call sign?
Back in 86, 85, there was a very popular show about Gordon Shumway, the alien life form.
Told you.
One of my buddies said, well, you look just like him. You know, you've got this little shock of blonde hair. You got this little belly.
Brutal.
And basically, you just tell people to bugger off and you tell them exactly what you think.
Oh, no.
And luckily, I didn't make any huge mistakes so that somebody changed it later on.
The fighter pilot community is awesome.
Oh, so how, like, so did they give that to you your first tour? Like, was it a?
I was on the F5 course.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So that's your real first fighter platform. Was
Alien life
it
form.
at all? Yeah, was it at all like ceremonious, or was it just like, hey, Alf?
We didn't do that. It was Gord Cooper, Gordo. We called him Hollywood for a bit because he was in a little movie that CBC was doing. But Gordo said, "You look like Alf," and he started calling me Alf all the time, and then it sort of caught on. But we didn't have call sign things like poor Bo when he got in trouble. There was they were having these formal things, and it was almost forced. And I addressed that in the book as well. That back when my dad was flying fighters, he was McWillie, and there was another guy who was Jerk. Well, his name was Jerkowski.
Okay.
So, but it was just generic, not generic, but what's the word? Get my thesaurus out
Just
here.
natural, just kind of.
Yeah, natural. I was looking for the synonym of that.
Doug,
Organic?
Doug is organic.
Organic. That's what I was looking
See,
for.
that's why Doug gets the producer credit here.
Thank you,
Editor
voice
and
of
producer.
God.
Voice
So,
of God.
but that's how it used to be, and now it's become, well, everybody needs a nickname, so you have to think of something that's clever, and of course the woke police kind of stepped in there as well.
Yeah, they're in the States
What-
too.
So you were flying the Hornet in 1986, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So Top Gun comes out.
Oh yeah.
How did that change your whole life?
That
What was being a fighter pilot in 1986 like? That's all I want to know.
Yeah. Actually, when it came out, I was flying T-33s and deploying to Miramar for exercises. So that was
Close
a lot.
enough. Yeah.
You were in Miramar
Yeah.
In
And
in a flight suit.
if you had mask marks and you walk into the officers club in Miramar,
That's all you need.
they don't know anything. You don't need to tell them anything. But then I've heard some of your critique of these things. I find when it comes to this, Top Gun, it captured the essence of air combat. It captured the feeling and the excitement and all of those aspects. And of course, they're like way too big and way too close, and none of the maneuvers make sense. But it was fun, and
Oh yeah.
I also felt jealous because Cold Lake is not Miramar.
Alf, don't worry. Miramar is not Miramar anymore.
Miramar's now in Nevada.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, Top Gun's now in Nevada. So
Navy
Fallon.
Fallon.
Yeah, Fallon. Lemoore is kind of your next place.
did you guys go to Fallon at all?
No, the Western guys did, the Cold Lake guys, but
Okay.
the one time I stopped in for fuel, it was in a Tudor, and we arrived there with no gas to go anywhere. We're at 13,000 feet, and they tell us the airfield's closed, and it was like huge headwinds trying to get anywhere, and we only had a few 100 pounds of gas left, and so I looked down, and they started describing. So we're in this holding pattern, and I looked down. There's an F4 that had taken a cable and then veered off the side of the runway. There were huge crosswinds, like 45 knots at 90 degrees to everything.
Wow.
So there was an A4 halfway down one runway, had veered off the side, and then nose wheel collapsed, and his tail was hanging out partway onto the runway. And there was another aircraft had taken the barrier downwind approach end and ripped it right out, and there was debris all over that end of that runway. So we just watched the fuel gauge, and eventually it got to the point we said, okay, if we declare an emergency, we could land, right? And I go, yep. So we scoped out the best part. It was where the A4 was off the side of the runway, and we saw fine until we get really short final, and then the sandstorm it was basically like whiteout. So you just round out, look over the side. Okay, I can see a little bit of concrete, and then bang, bang with the crosswind, and then thinking the A4 is coming up pretty soon. Maybe we should ease a little away from it. And then there goes the tail. Okay, we missed that. And then Fallon was quite the place. I don't want to go back there again.
Yeah.
Well, Gonky, we need to catch up with the audience.
Yes.
While we do that, you've actually got some people from your students.
Youssef, yes.
Your students are proud of you, Mr. McWilliams. What kind of students? Is this flying students, or are you teaching like something else now? Or
yeah, my last gig was teaching at an aviation college near Bagotville, and
really,
I was teaching in French. I taught basic navigation, advanced navigation, air rigs, aerodynamics, advanced supersonic, all that stuff. And I also, Vincent Chevrier, yeah. I also taught aviation English. So like Youssef last year. I retired, and then they were really short instructors. You know, airlines are hiring anybody with any kind of experience. So they were running low on experienced instructors. So they called me up and said, hey, if you do it by video link, can you teach your courses? So I've been teaching a little bit at the schools.
Oh, yeah. What a great deal.
This is all like collegiate level or like at a flight school?
It's a 3-year program. They learn a bunch of stuff about aviation, and they end up with a commercial IFR at the end of it. And there are 3 streams. There's a helicopter, there's a multi-engine, and there's a bush stream.
Wow. Cool. Well, Aaron says Gonky needs to fly the C-130 when we get it in DCS. That's going back.
I'm going to pull the wings off, man. I'm going to pull the wings off that thing.
Do you use a joystick in DCS?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure. This man right here. No C-130 survives first contact with Gonky.
No, it's good. Fuselage only at landing.
Everyone's got a flight plan until Gonky flies it.
That's right.
Ghost Dog says, hi from the UK. I'm a huge aviation fan and spending all free time on American base UK RAF Lakenheath. Thank you for your service, keeping us safe. Thanks, Ghost Dog.
Thanks, man.
Ethor says, good evening, ladies and gents. Sorry I'm late. Welcome. Better late than never.
Yep.
The Waterloo Warbirds have a flight-worthy T-33 here in Ontario, also available for flight experience. Great to see a guest from the RCAF. There you go. And they did it in Canadian dollars, so... Matt says Northern Lightning is now underway here in Wisconsin, and we were enjoying watching and hearing all the Fat Amelias and Vipers zipping around. Best part of summer. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's a good. Did you ever participate in any of that, Alf? Like Northern Lightning? Did you really? Is that a common? So you did all the exercises.
Oh, amalgam this, amalgam that, and all the other stuff.
Northern.
How many Hornets did you say Canada bought?
We bought 138. We had 3 squadrons in Europe. We had 3 in Cold Lake, 2 in Bagotville. Training unit was Cold Lake.
Okay.
And then we only upgraded 80 to A+.
Okay.
And I think we're probably down to about 65 or so. But we bought 18 Australian ones that were also A+. So that bumped us up a bit.
Those have center barrel issues?
They were upgraded, as far as I know, because Canada and Australia got together on a thing called IFOS, the International Follow-On Structural Test Program. And we had a fuselage section, and they had other parts of another airframe and we ran fatigue tests on them and shared the results and did the mods together.
Wow. Because that was the big thing, you know, when U.S. contractors were going to buy them, and they're like, wait a minute, it's like 7,000 hours
Yeah.
per airplane to fix them. Can't afford it. Zibam Zoe says, love the show. Already giving my 7-month-old son Ace all of the aviation content.
Nice.
Keep up the good work. Love the name. Griff says, hello and welcome, Alf. Very interesting story so far. Thank you for your service. Does your RCAF survival kit include maple syrup and is it Labatt's?
Labatt's
Yeah.
Blue. Yeah. Oh, that's classified.
Because it's Molson Golden.
Are you? Do you? So is the national sport hockey?
Oh yeah.
Are you a hockey fan?
Yes.
Were you crushed by the Stanley Cup this year?
Come on, mover. Don't insult the man.
It's the only game I've watched all year. I was like,
But
I'm
actually,
going to watch a couple of these games.
you know, if you look at the teams that have won the cup in the last several years, the rosters are majority Canadian players. So
Just in the U.S. Yeah.
yeah, and that's why, like Brett Hull. Well, guess what? He's American, but his father was Canadian. So there's a lot of second generation, the Kachuk brothers, all of this. So all of our best talent is going to the NHL and in Sunbelt and other places. But it's I just enjoy the games now. I used to be a hardcore Montreal Canadiens fan and Oilers when I lived in Alberta. But and I've been to a bunch of the games all over the place. So it's fun.
Yeah. Does Canada still have the Canadian Football League?
The CFL, yeah.
Yeah, still a thing.
They start earlier, like they're probably about week 8 or 9 right now. But
Really?
I think there are 9 teams across the country. It's kind of fun. It's way different. There's only 3 downs. Field is 110 yards, and there are 12 players instead of 11. And there are few, like when you inbounds for a catch 1 or 2 feet, there are like some minor differences here and there. But it's pretty much so. The CFL it can be really boring, like 3 and out,
Yeah.
over and over, and a lot of kicks. But then, as the end of the game happens and people are taking more risks because they need to get the points, then it gets really wild because you get Hail Mary passes and like a bunch of laterals all over the field and people running in circles. And
Well, Doug Flutie, right?
Pardon?
Doug Flutie did that in the Canadian Football League. That's the famous thing, right? Did he do something Canadian?
Yeah, it's the Stampeders, I believe. Doug Flutie.
What? So if you only have 3 downs, are you punting on 3rd down?
Yep.
Wow.
They tend to go if they got 2 or 3 yards to go. They tend to gamble a little bit more, but depending on field position.
Midnightly would like to know, on ice, are your feet wet or feet cold?
On ice, your feet cold because you're not. You can, in fact, in the winter in the prairies, we wouldn't even wear an inflatable vest. There's no point because it's all frozen.
Oh, okay.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah. Laura says a few dollars toward Luna's appearance fee. I don't know, man. She's boycotting us.
Yeah.
She's been out. Charlie says, thanks for the amazing podcast. Been watching live since day 1. It's always been a great show. Keep it up. And we're on
Charlie.
season 2. Thanks to Gonky.
Episode 1.
Hi, fellas. Writing from Ukraine. Could you give your opinion on what kind of AIM-120 is mounted on the Ukrainian F-16?
Man, I don't know.
I read, so I'm just that they were B models, AIM-120Bs, and like they were older and like AIM-9 Limas. Like it wasn't new, whatever they had, but they were a captive carry, like they weren't,
But any AIM-120 is better than anything else.
Oh yeah.
Correct.
My son's fiance was born in Ukraine, lived there. She was about 12, so Slava-Ukrainian.
There you go. Cluterus says, sup nerds. Sorry I've been gone. Moved out to Oceanside for a new job. Missed the show. Hope to catch up on everything soon.
Thanks, man.
Shaker Maker. Can you ask Alf if he flew early days with CF-18 pilot named John Watchurst?
Sorry, it does not ring a bell.
That's like when you ask a cop if they know like a cop in 2 states over. Like, do all you Canadian fighter pilots know each other?
It's
I
a small,
If
was
you ask them,
community, isn't it?
skiing in Switzerland, met a German. He said, "Oh, I know a Canadian," and yes, I did know him.
damn it,
Just a Canadian, not even a Canadian fighter pilot. He
That's
just
right,
knew-
just a
some random
Canadian.
Canadian.
And Canada is not a small country.
No,
Okay.
Oh, I love it.
TMB5 says, "Were you in Maple Flag at all? There's some great pictures in the book, A Canadian Fighter Pilot."
right over there on the shelf. I can see it from here. Yeah, great pictures, and I've been probably in about 8 or 9 or 10 maple flags. It's a good exercise.
There's
what
the hero, the man of the hour,
Nice.
right there. What is that? It looks like you're wearing a body cam. What's the black thing?
I'm not really sure what that is. I've never really paid attention because it was down below my chin. But
Yeah, I just
Looks
put
like
it
an
on.
iPhone,
Whatever.
maybe. Just,
Yeah, it's his iPhone case.
That's right.
that was before iPhones.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Indian Navy says, "Did
Yes.
Alf ever
Lob.
fly with Lee Obst at Cold Lake?"
Lob and I went through military college, went through flying training on the same course. We instructed together in Moose Jaw. One of my best buds.
Hell yeah. See, everybody knows everybody. Crazy Pete says, "Gonky should have the Forge as book written by Mike Tyson."
Oh,
Be
man.
old anytime soon. Colin says, "Hi guys, hi Dan. Greetings from one Hornet model builder to another."
Nice.
Hey, Colin, and enjoy the tutor. I sent him a kit a few weeks back.
Did you really? That's awesome.
Nice.
Small community. Crazy Pete says, "Alf, were you ever in Gagetown? I grew up in New Brunswick."
Only flying close air support training. So I've been orbiting around near the river and near Fredericton and all that stuff. But I've never set foot in Gagetown. But I know a lot of people in the ARMY like it there.
Alf, random question for you. Did you guys have rockets?
Yes.
Did you? So you got to shoot. You got to shoot them.
Those are fun. We
You didn't have rockets, Gonky?
No, dude, they just took them out of the inventory when I showed up.
We had they were 2.75 inch, but they were CRV7, Canadian Rocket Vehicle 7, and they would get going Mach 3 or 4. And so you could shoot them from about 9,000 feet.
Wow.
And when they first got them, it was on the 104. My dad told me they went up to a range in northern Germany and they got kicked off the range for using live weapons. But what they were doing was shooting these things at about 4,000 feet from the 104, and the motors were still burning and they just exploded. And
Wow. That's awesome. Yeah, I always wanted to shoot them. And in Malaysia, I guess they used to shoot them as well, but they just quit when I got there. So it's too late.
yeah, they had them on the Tudor, actually. They're
Really?
Tudor. Yeah, that looks like a CRV7. And the blue warheads are depleted uranium training warheads.
Did you ever have any of like the fins not pop out and one of them go crazy or?
Oh yeah, they're don't look too carefully at the film afterwards.
Yeah, I've heard stories.
Yeah,
TMB5 says, "At least it wasn't for eating cats."
yeah, especially like young cats. Yeah,
That's right, Alf. Alf liked eating. That's right.
Yeah.
you're lucky. You're lucky.
Well,
That's right. That's right.
Paul K says, "Hi Alf, I own a former former RCAF T-33 serial 579. Any chance you flew it? I emailed Gonky a photo of it."
Very
Really?
good chance. It's one that it's a tail number I recognized.
Dude,
I have
it's
to
a
check my email again.
T-33.
That's awesome.
Hell yeah. That's cool.
Awesome. Hey, Mover
I'm
will
not
fly
even-
it.
Gonky. Yeah, I will. Gonky, pronounce that.
$10.
Stefan Yager.
Yager, being a former Viper driver and a fan of the A-10, what is your opinion of the FA-16 concept? Was it the best of both worlds or a waste of time? By the way, hello, Gronky. How's the knee doing? Well, one question at a time. I guess he's talking to me. The FA is just a Navy thing. Like they add FA, because at some point they're like, we need to have 2 missions and we need to fund these 2 missions. But the Viper eventually just became FA by default. I mean, it is fighter attack just based on the ordnance it can carry. But I think you're talking about the A-16. That was a concept that was just straight. It was like green camo, and it had different, but that was back before, you know, they did the midlife upgrades, they did the common configuration and all that. Like now, for all intents and purposes, they are FA-16s. So, I mean, that's kind of how it is. I mean, people, when I did the Hornet versus Viper video, everybody was like, hey, it's 2 separate jets with 2 separate missions. And I'm like, actually, other than the boat part, they're identical. I mean, multi-role fighter, we do the same thing, you know, and we are equally bad at the same amount of things because we only practice 1 a month, you know. I guess Alf, was that a thing too? Did you guys do, because in the Viper world, it was phase based at some squadrons and it was free for all at others. So, you know, we would have at Homestead, like 1 month BFM, clean jets. Then we do air intercepts. Then we do DCA. Then we do, okay, we're putting tanks on with DCA. Then we would go air to ground phase, and then surface attack, and then the whole thing, opposed sat, and then close air support. Each one was a different month. And then some squadrons, they would mix it up. They'll just like, you'd have half and half. What did you guys do?
Well, we did what you did. We didn't have enough aircraft to be able to have like 7 of them configured with centerline and 10 with 2 tanks and jugs and everything else. But we would do it in phases. We'd do a workup, get to the point where, okay, everybody's happy with their level of proficiency. Now let's reconfigure the aircraft and go and do this again. And then we'd plan it based on exercises. Did we have a Homestead or Eglin deployment coming, and what were we doing there? What was our role at the upcoming green flag or something like that? So there was a lot of changes, and you're right. You get to a point where if it had been like a month and a half, 2 months since we did a particular type of training, and then we got told do it tomorrow, it's like, oh boy, we give us a day or 2.
Yeah.
So
Gonky, how's your?
Yeah,
absolutely. Sorry, Gonky, how's your knee? That was the other part of this question.
It's not good.
Okay,
I can walk, but it's still issues.
You could do that. So
yeah, I can walk, but I think I'm just getting used to limping now. You know, I also have arthritis in my knees, so they're doing some treatment, but I don't know. They say I got to give it 4 to 6 weeks, so that's what I'm doing. At the end of it, we'll see what happens. But getting old.
Looney Hoons says, any of you gents picking up a force feedback base? I'd love to see how Gonky reacts to finally feeling his jet again. So Gonky,
what is it?
Exactly. I'm about to explain because I knew you would.
We saw that coming.
Yeah. So like this right here is a force feedback racing wheel, right? So you feel like you're driving on the road.
Oh, gotcha.
Which you did felt like nothing, right? It was just, there's no feel. So what companies are now doing, WinWing being one of them, they're creating these bases that you put the stick on and it'll simulate. Remember that question I sent you the other day? And that was from them. They were asking like, hey, what should it feel like? So yes, eventually, I don't know, you know, because you're limited to where you go, you know, as far as that, which I don't know when you'll ever do DCS again at this rate. But so yes, but maybe not Gonky unless he comes to my house.
Yeah, it'd be cool. I mean, I love to try. I mean, dude, that the whole DCS virtual thing is only going to get better.
Yeah. Chris says, hey, Alf, the RCAF was a small world. What are the odds that son of Dulac, Chris Lake, would be watching you on the Mover and Gonky show?
Yeah, small world. Dulac was one of my father's friends. And because you see, you take LAC, L-A-C, and of the lake.
Gotcha.
Awesome. Was he a pilot with your dad?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So he's the son of, he looks young.
Son of my father's friend. Yeah.
Did your dad fly in Vietnam?
No. Not that he told me. No, he didn't.
No. Aaron says, congrats on the new season and happy Gonky New Year. BJ says, aloha.
Hello.
Aloha. Chili says, thanks for being on the show, Alf. I've enjoyed hearing your stories. And then Colin says, since it's showing up in the comments, F-35 for Canada, yay or nay? How long you got?
Well, obviously, yay, because we can't afford to have a mixed fleet. And if you're going to come to the show, if you're going to show up to play, you better have something that's really, really good. Like, there are lots of support aircraft needed, and like I talked a bit, as I said, with these Burlington guys. They work a lot with the Bagotville Hornets, and they're doing the Hornet is the missile truck, and the F-35 is doing the targeting. So yeah, obviously you're limited with internal carriage and all that stuff. But on the other hand, I think when it comes to survivability and the ability to integrate and know what's going on in the battle space, like I've done so many NORAD exercises, jamming, comms, radar jamming at night in cloud, icing, and you're just lost. You know, you're moving around, you have no idea. And then, oh, there's spoofing too. So, you know, which lane should I go into? Left lane. Okay. And then which lane are you in? Left lane. Because the spoofer is saying this. So it was just to have, and the tactics changed so much, and the ability of the aircraft. It's funny because I've got two very good friends, Billy Flynn and Ricardo Traven, both guys I flew with. One was the chief test pilot on the Super Hornet, the other one on the F-35. And they both say good things about the aircraft, but when you listen carefully, what Billy says, yeah, he doesn't even have to sell it that much. It's because it's such a capable aircraft. The other options we had, Gripen, no, that's not even close, but that was a very political thing. So I'm an F-35 proponent, and however, I'm sick and tired of talking about it on Facebook, so I just block anybody who tries to get into it.
Perfect.
Did you fly with Ricardo?
Yeah. There's a picture in my book, actually. We're deployed to Lahr, Germany, 2 squadrons, his squadron, my squadron, and we're in the same picture.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Awesome.
He was when I worked at Boeing, he was still there.
Yeah. Decent guy, and he tells the truth as well. But you know, you can phrase things a certain way and make it seem good.
Right.
Awesome. Well, moving on to our first topic of the night. From Canada, from the left. I've got it, Doug.
Cool. The long awaited.
We would promised. Well, Gonky promised it last week and we lied. didn't do it. But we're not going to watch all 6 minutes, but
Alf, were you ever a demo guy for the?
No, I did though. When I worked a lot in the simulator in Bagotville, I would run the simulator while the previous year's demo pilot would teach the next year's demo pilot.
Okay.
So I flew a lot of the stuff in the sim just to try it out. But
yeah,
there were certain things like the square loop going downhill. I would always inject a leading edge flap fail as he was headed straight down.
Yeah,
because that was probably the worst case scenario. And there was also there was another one where I'd give him an engine failure during the high alpha pass. And so there were techniques there. And usually on the first time they'd crash on the high alpha pass, and then they'd milk it out at about 22 AOA and just get it barely to come up.
Does Canada do it like the Air Force or the Navy, so to speak, in the sense that in the Navy, if you're a demo pilot, you're also a schoolhouse pilot. It's like just another duty you did. Yeah. Whereas in the Air Force, it's like that's all you do is demo. What does Canada do? Like
the Navy, you're a regular pilot and your weekends are full of doing this. And then once or twice a week, you practice when you can get a clean aircraft and do the job. But you're in the schedule and doing everything else.
All right. Well, for your reaction, we'll do the first part. We're not going to do the whole. We'll do like the first 2 minutes. This part is really.
I had somebody ask me if there was a limiter to stop you from scraping the burner cans on takeoff, and no, there's not. But what I said is he does it with flaps up. So by the time he does that, he's going fast enough and with enough thrust. He takes off with about 8,000 pounds of gas. So you've already got 1-to-1 thrust to weight. So it basically just gets airborne before it can really scrape, but it's close.
I didn't notice that. Flaps were up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing they do is they keep the flaps up auto and then rotate late, like at 180 knots or something.
Yeah.
That was late. God, that thing's moving.
Yeah.
Hard to believe that's 180 knots.
Yeah.
Standard engines, Alf, right? Canada didn't do EP.
These are not the EPEs. They're the 32,000 pounds in burner with both of them.
Yeah.
I got to say, that is a
cool.
wicked paint scheme.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That thing looks good.
It's really nice. The 100th anniversary of the RCAF formed on April Fool's Day, 1924.
Was that like a throwback to an original paint scheme? Is that why? Is that what it's?
No, there's all kinds of elements in there. It's very, very busy paint scheme. I haven't had a good look at it, but it's got all sorts of little symbolic stuff all over it.
Alf, your time in the Hornet, did the demo routine change at all, or have they kept it pretty standard?
This is quite different from back then. For several years, it was almost always the same one, and now I've seen them change it up a bit here and there.
Is that, you think, because of the software updates, the flight control systems probably made some things possible or more safe?
That's a good question. I'm not sure what triggered it because I was out of the game when they upgraded to the new was it 17 COFPs or something, or
Yeah,
whatever
I
it's
forget.
called.
Yeah.
But they certainly made it safer because now this losing control when you're bottoming out at high alpha is less of a problem.
Yeah.
Chris Hadfield was involved with that.
They had that mishap, right? That probably changed. Didn't they have the ejection?
Yeah, you lost the motor during the high alpha pass.
Yeah.
That really didn't have a lot to do with anything to do with flight controls. He didn't realize he'd lost the engine. And he actually sat next to me in the simulator console with his back brace for a couple months.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Brian Buse was his name, Boozer.
So he's got everything out.
Yep.
Yeah. Probe, hook.
Yeah. Man. And all the dirt's on the top of the canopy there.
Oh yeah.
It's
all the dead bugs.
Yeah, for sure.
That's such a good looking airplane.
Yeah, that paint job.
Mm-hmm.
They've got
don't make them like they used to anymore.
No, man, they've got the best. Yeah. No chance getting a paint job like that on an F-35.
It would take a lot of paint.
Special paint.
It would be a lot of paint. Yeah. Do we want to watch any more, Gonky?
Nah, it's fine. I just wanted. I really just kind of want to pick Alf's brain about, how does Canada do their demo, and I mean, obviously it's a lot. It's probably part of the Air Force's public affairs campaign to attract, the next generation.
Yeah, we used to have one demo pilot and aircraft per wing, but now there's just one, so it alternates between the two bases. And we've had, of course, with the pandemic and all that, it threw a wrench into the works. And, also with the F-35 showing up, we're going to be downscaling our air shows at the main operating bases because of the security problems.
Yeah. Yeah. I also wonder if they just kind of want to preserve the flight hours on the Hornets they have, right? Because you said they're going to spend some money to upgrade these even more.
Yeah, these aircraft, this routine is actually pretty tough on fatigue life.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's a loaded roll.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Wow. A little bunt to accelerate.
Yeah.
There's the fuel.
Yeah. That thing there.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
That is awesome. Hey, Alf, that reminded me of one thing I wanted to ask you, because I put it on my Facebook page the other day, is footage of a Canadian Hornet doing tail slides. Did Did you guys have a flight in the syllabus where you would go up and try to depart the airplane or depart the airplane? It was like a confidence flight that they would do with us when I was a student to show you how basically far past the envelope really you could push the airplane and still have some sort of control. Did you guys do that? Did you teach it?
Early on, yes, we did that. And in the F5 as well. And it was scarier in the F5 than it was in the Hornet, that's for sure. Because you'd go about 70 degrees nose up and then chop the throttles and just let it fall. And compressor stalls happened about 60% of the time in the F5.
Right. So did they eventually take that out of the Hornet syllabus?
I don't know. I don't know what the latest version is of the syllabus,
Yeah.
but we used to do it.
They took it out. Because when I became an IP, they didn't do it anymore, which
Probably
I thought was
waste of time, eh?
I thought as a student, I thought it was awesome. I mean, we tail slid it complete. The fuel was going past the canopy, and we totally cross controlled, and it would kind of start to spin, and then it would just spiral. So it really put a lot of confidence in me as far as like, okay, this thing ain't like the T-45. So, but yeah,
awesome. Yeah. So we got some more from the audience. Crazy Pete says, "Do the snowboards have new ejection seats yet?" Snowbirds have new ejection seats yet?
I'm just trying to think because I saw them a few weeks ago. They don't look like they have the new seats, but I know that there's a plan to install them because those seats are not the best ejection seats. There were 0-60 seats, meaning if you're on the ground, you have to be going at least 60 knots before there's enough air to catch the parachute and not have the pilot die.
Yeah. That's what killed the public affairs
That's
officer, because the seat just didn't have it was out of the envelope.
And she may have contacted the canopy as well. I think they were doing like a bat turn, trying to get back to the runway. And
yeah, terrible. We talked about this a little bit. Eddie says, Alf, do the wings fold in CF-18? They're rated under 9 or 7.5 G. Well, I guess the follow-up question to that, did you ever paddle, or was the 7.5 G kind of a hard limit for the airframe life?
I never paddled, so we did answer these. Yes, they fold. Yes, we use it to park the aircraft, and 7.5 G. We did have the paddle. We practiced it in the simulator a lot, just so because there's a little bit of manipulation of the arms that have to do there. And what that gives you, I think, what is it, 50% more? Is that what the thing is, Gonky? You might remember.
Yeah, I think it's another G.5, wasn't it?
Oh, more than that, because there was we early on in the program, we had an intercept called a slice. And so you're up about 10 or 12,000 feet above the target. It's a T-33. So T-33s are the original stealth aircraft. They're really hard to see on the radar. And so, especially looking down. So we pick them up about 22 miles looking down. And then you do basically a vertical dive down at this thing's flying at 500 feet above the ground. Well, on one course, one of the first courses before mine, they're doing this in cloud. And so the guy's coming down in cloud, and he realizes too late that he's getting fixated and he needs to pull out hard. So he used the limiter, pulled 11.5 G.
Oh, wow.
And avoided the ground by about 100 feet and then survived. On the same mission, another guy used the limiter, but he hit the ground and died. So yes, the limiter is installed, it works, and it gives you a lot of G. And I think that aircraft didn't have any real damage to it.
Really? The wings didn't look like a 7.8 after that? It wasn't kind of...
Yeah. No, there may have been a popped rivet or two, but that's about it.
Wow. And Plexi, my favorite Hornet paint scheme in DCS is the red Canadian demo scheme. I always pick that one if I have a choice. I'm a virtual Canadian.
Represent.
That's awesome.
Represent. I want to kind of skip ahead a little bit because this plays to your NORAD experience.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought this would be an interesting thing to ask you about. So recently, this came out. NORAD jets intercept joint Russian-Chinese bomber flight near Alaska. This was July 25th, 2024. And you can see the picture: two CF-18 Hornets, two F-35s, and two F-16 Vipers from NORAD ID'd and intercept the Tu-95 and the PRC H-6 aircraft in the Alaska ADIZ. And you probably, Alf, did you spend a lot of time, I guess, in that area? Is that kind of similar?
Alaska, not so much, because there were American assets in Alaska doing that. But actually, for several weeks, I think the F-15 had all kinds of structural problems. So we actually sent some Hornets to hold alert at their base. So was it Eielson or Anchor, somewhere in that area in Alaska. So this wasn't staged at all. Two F-18s, two F-35s. No. NORAD didn't plan this. Tanker support and everything.
So what SecDef says is Lloyd Austin says this is the first time we've seen these two countries fly together. They didn't enter our airspace. It's about 200 miles away. Obviously worried about the Exocet anti-ship missile, Gonky.
It's very effective.
Yeah. During the flight, the Russian and Chinese crews worked out issues of cooperation during all stages of the air patrol, according to a release from the Russian Ministry of Defense.
They always tell the truth.
Yeah, they never lie. But it says Russian Aerospace Forces Su-30 SM and Su-35S aircraft carried out air cover and the joint flight for the duration was 5 hours, according to the Ministry of Truth and Defense. During the patrol, the both counters strictly obeyed the provision of international law. There's been no violation of airspace. Yeah, so that's kind of the first time we've seen them operating together. And I don't know, Alf. What do you think, based on what you've seen in your experience? How do these intercepts kind of play out? I mean, have you done any that you can talk about? Obviously, I mean, have you done intercepts like this, and kind of what's going on, from your perspective?
When it came to real world, there was a lull in Russian bear traffic, because there were two types of missions the bears would do. They would do the cruise missile deployment, where they'd fly off of Labrador and Baffin Island. They'd come in, they'd simulate a missile launch, and then they'd turn around and go back home. And then they had another one, which was a transit of, I think it's the Bear Delta, the one with the big radar in the back. And it would be going to Cuba to do ASW, anti-submarine warfare stuff. So there was two main missions. I was on alert one time. We got the call, configure with weapons and all the fuel you can put on it. And I was waiting for an airborne alert, because we would get hours and hours notice of this, because it takes them a long time to come. And so there's air defense radars in Norway, and then in England, and then in Scotland, and like they were tracked all the way across. And with the CF-18 is that we often didn't have tanker support. And so we would forward deploy to Goose Bay. So it's 500 miles closer. So we'd go to Goose, refuel, and sit and wait if we happen to be in Bagotville. Or in Goose, we would go to Gander sometimes, depending on where they were. And so I was told, get ready to go. And then we changed out crews, and the other two guys went. It was a bit of a dog's breakfast. Now they have satellite communications and better comms links. But back then there were NORAD repeater stations, and hundreds of miles off the coast, it was really tough to talk to anybody. So, and you'd get a vector from NORAD, and then you'd look at the radar and, well, wait a minute, I got these big blips over here. But so the 12-second sweep and all that, and the problems they had with gaps in their coverage, and they were estimating. So it was very difficult to really be on top of NORAD exercises, because there's just so much distance involved and poor communications, but it's better now.
Wow. Would they be, would those intercepts sometimes drag out? As far as like flight time?
if you were lucky enough to have a tanker that had a probe and drogue system, and you weren't like a USAF tanker would show up and you go, oh, sorry, you can't do anything for me. But then you could end up going, following these guys for a while. But we had tactics where one would go in, we had to take pictures, get certain serial numbers in certain places, but the other Hornet would always be standing off, weapons locked, just in case they pulled anything stupid and ready to take a shot.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Awesome.
All right, we'll talk about the drop tanks here in a second, then the mental health minute. But first, T-Goat says, do you know Ross Granley? Snowbird number 2, CF5, CF18, does air shows these days. He flew P-51 at Coal Lake this year with the Hornet demo. Thanks.
That's cool.
Yeah, he was, I believe, we crossed paths in Moose Jaw ages ago. He's been a lot in air shows. That's kind of his thing these days.
That's awesome. Got to see the CF-18 demo jet in person recently as a stack display. First time seeing an F-18 in person. It's a good looking jet. Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to send Freedom Money Mover. Canada's free.
That's awesome.
Cluterus says they should add dogfighting to the Olympics. Just saying. I don't know about all that. Gary says, did Alf ever intercept and escort Santa?
Well, that was the flight that I did have the maple syrup and Labatt's beer.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Confirmed.
NORAD tracks them every year. We help them out.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love it.
Drink too much of the beer and you'll see Santa. So the kids at home, Doug, do you have that story? Gonky, you want to cover this?
Do I have it up? I have it up,
Yeah,
dude.
it does.
You're the F-16 guy. I read it. He was on a training sortie and had to punch his tanks, and one of them blew up. That was in my mind. I'm like, do tanks blow up?
Well, if they're full of fuel and they hit something and spark, they don't typically.
Like in what's that movie?
Iron Eagle.
Hornet? No, dude, they had to create a heat source for the the SAMs that were chasing them.
Oh, behind enemy lines.
Behind enemy lines, yeah. It went from like radar guided to heat seeking.
Yeah, so 2 Vipers from Toledo were operating, and then one declared emergency, had to punch off the tanks. One vehicle didn't fare so well, but nobody was injured. But they took out Tractor Supply. The parking lot, not the actual Tractor Supply, just the parking lot.
If an F-16 drop tank lands on my pick 'em up truck, I'm keeping it.
Yeah. Buy it back from the insurance company, Doug.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm keeping the tank.
No, that's what I'm saying.
I don't think they're going to let you. So I guess the question was, we did this in the Hornet. I mean, so there were emergencies where you'd punch off your tanks. In the Viper, there are quite a few, because anytime your engine is at risk with a single engine aircraft, the boldface often requires it. Zoom, stores, jet, eject. Zoom, stores, jet. Like those are always the first two, because tanks add weight, tanks add drag. And if you're in a situation where you're not sure if you're going to be able to make a runway because the engine has failed or is failing or is not producing the thrust you want, what they'll do is get a 1-to-1. So like if you're at 7,000 feet, 7 miles, that's a 1-to-1 glide ratio, and try to establish a glide. But the best glide is with nothing hanging. So you'll punch off stores and tanks, but typically in training, we only run with tanks that are carded that you can actually punch off, because like a targeting pod, you can't punch that off. So you'll punch off the tanks, mark where they were, hope it doesn't hit anything, and then glide in to a flame out landing or a precautionary flame out landing or something like that. Alf, have you ever had to or seen anything with punching off tanks in your career?
It was kind of funny. The very first air to ground mission that the guys did in the Gulf, Canada had been doing air defense over the Gulf forever. And then when there was nobody to go after, they decided, okay, we'll change rules and we'll start dropping bombs, targeting radars, like with the radar through the oil smoke to the armored vehicles that were dug in. So with dumb bombs. So what was the error possibility there with the winds and all that? But let's not even think about that. But the very first one, they cross into enemy territory and they're lit up by a SAM. So all the guys dropped all the tanks and they got back. And somebody said, you realize that we don't have that many tanks around. So you can't just go dropping them on every single thing. We used to set it up so that if you had 3 tanks, you drop the 2 underwing tanks, keep the center line, because it negligible drag really for the center line. And so then at least you'd have the center line fuel. But one guy had to drop a couple. They were relatively full. They didn't explode or anything. I'm just having a hard time seeing a tank explode, because unless it's just the right mix of air and fuel, and then it breaks.
Right.
There's a spark somewhere.
That's what I'm thinking. Is it had to just be like that perfect. It hit concrete, asphalt, had a little bit of a skid to it, sparked, had air. Gonky, what do you think, man?
Yeah, I don't know, man. That's why that's the only thing that stood out in my mind. I mean, you could, depending on the emergency, get rid of your tanks, especially if they're empty. But it sounds like they were full, which was probably early in the sortie. But typically with jet fuel, it kind of has to be, in liquid form, it's relatively flame resistant or explosion.
What kind does the Viper use? What kind is it? JP8?
Yeah.
You could throw a lit match into it and it should flame up.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I don't know.
Yeah, and this is also a news report, so we don't have a video of the thing erupting into a fireball. This could be the tank sparked when it hit, and they're like, "Oh my God, it's fire!" Like, or what hit the truck. Something caught on fire on the ground just from the impact. But I'd also point out, I answered the question in context of this news article. You would also, like you said, Alf, punch off tanks if you're defending from a SAM. You'd be punching off tanks if you're doing an intercept. This was very common, I think, with the guys doing Southern Watch, Northern Watch, where they would get turned towards MiG-25 or some Iraqi, and like, okay, boys, arm them up, punch the tanks off. They get up into the bozosphere trying to do, work, and then get called off, and they're like, oh God, we just punched off our tanks just for nothing again. So those are all considerations, but yeah, I mean, they're drop tanks. So and I've done HUD reviews of successful flame out landings where they're like, okay, punch them off, mark it, because you want to mark. Obviously you don't want to be a danger to persons or property on the ground, but what's going to make a bigger boom? A drop tank, 370 gallon drop tank, or a 30,000 pound F-16 or 25,000 pound F-16 or whatever it is when it hits the ground. If you can save that aircraft, that's preferable.
I found a video on YouTube, 2 F-16s, and it's a HUD video from one F-16. He has a flame out. He's got an experienced lead who's coaching him through it. And I hear him say, okay, marking the tanks and all that stuff. But I used it in my aviation English classes because I said, this is a beautiful example of communication, clear communication, giving him info when he needs it, backing off and letting him sort things out when he doesn't. He turned the wrong way at one point. The guy says, hey, turn left. The airfield's over there. Okay, thanks. And because he was absorbed doing red page emergencies. So it gets very intense when you, like my tutor days, I did flame out patterns all the time. And my cousin who flies for American Airlines actually had a flame out and managed to land the aircraft safely back at base. But we could glide from 25 miles south at 15,000 feet and make it fine to the airfield. It was a really good glider tutor. But in a fighter, when you're doing 260 knots or something like that, and look between your feet and that's where you're going, it's a little scary.
Alf, did you guys, sorry, man. Did you guys, sorry, go ahead, mover.
Go ahead, Gonky. You got it.
Do you normally fly with, in the Hornet, did you guys normally fly with 3 tanks since you said the tanker support wasn't very good, 2 tanks?
Yeah, that was a regular training load. It was either that or clean because BFM, we'd fly clean because we found that with a center line, you're actually increasing the weight and the flex on the wings when you're doing BFM. And so having the tanks under the wings, it does two things. Slows you down, gives you more drag, so you can't accelerate as much, can't pull as much G, and the weight on the wings reduces the flexion.
Nice. Save the airplane.
Yeah, I think you're right. When we fought the Canadians, they were clean. I don't remember them being centerline tank.
Yeah.
Yeah. When they come down
you don't want to fly a Viper when you're dragging any tanks around, that's for sure.
The Hornet's a different airplane when it's clean.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
So going back to the glide discussion, though, in an F-16 specifically, I think it's 7 nautical miles per 5,000 feet. I mean, we say 1-to-1 because that's, the thing, but it's 7 to 5. But it's actually, if you fly your numbers with the HUD, it's very easy. I mean, it's very straightforward because, you
see
just
where
have
you're
your
going.
checkpoints. Yeah, you know where it is. Hey, I get 11 to 17 degrees. And, I put the runway 11 to 17 degrees nose, in the HUD. That's when I can drop the gear. And at that point, once the gear's down, it's energy management with the speed brake. I can change my pitch. I can do that. It's the space shuttle approach. It's exactly what the space shuttle used to do, coming in with the orbiter. So, not that you'd ever want that because you only get one shot, but it's still, it's not the worst. It's not like trying to do it probably in the old T-45, A that Gonky flew without any references. Although we did it in the T6 and it was just as good. So, yeah, cool. Well, anyway, moving on, since we've reached the end, tonight's Mental Health Minute. Gonky, dude, the world is on fire right now.
Seems like it.
Yeah. And I thought about this because somebody posted a stock market chart and they were like, oh God, the market's real down today. Everybody's pretty upset. Same thing with Sunday in the foreign markets, in the Pacific there. And you look at it and you're like, oh God, this is the worst in 50 years. But then if you zoom out in the chart, the trend is still up. I mean, overall in the last this amount of time, you're still, if you stayed in from the beginning to the end, it's still pretty good. That's not to say things aren't bad right now, but when we do fighter tactics, you talk about open the aperture, especially with like targeting pod stuff. If you're in narrow field of view, sometimes you'll miss what you're looking at because you'll get lost. How many times have you been looking at a target area? You slew the pod a little bit. Next thing you know, you don't even know what you're looking at anymore. And you got to zoom out, take a step back and go, okay, big to small, let's funnel ourselves in. So how that applies to mental health is when things are going pretty bad in our lives, sometimes we get this narrow focus and we think, this is the worst time of my life. It's never going to get better. But if you zoom out, it's a blip on the radar. It's a moment in time that times were good before and times will be good after. But it's the connecting the dots and going, this is going to be temporary because overall, and it's the gratitude thing. I start looking at what's good and what's been good and how I'm going to get through it by connecting the good future and the good past and not focusing on what's going on now. That doesn't mean you don't identify it and you don't address the bad things, but don't get bogged down staring at the one bad thing and miss the fact that the overall trend might be good. So do that, and always, have a buddy, especially if you're the buddy, use the buddy system to help your friends see it. Like Gonky, we were talking about rough patches not too long ago, and those are temporary. But use your friends, reach out. If you don't have somebody that you can reach out to immediately, Military One Source is good. Your chaplain's good if you're in the military. Hell, go to your command. If nothing else, go to somebody that can help you, because if you play I Have a Secret and it affects your career, people will be like, well, why didn't you say something? We could have helped you. So, and if you're not in the military, 988, call 988, get some help, go to the ER if you have to, call 911. Just don't make a temporary problem permanent. So, Gonky, what do you got?
Well, you covered it pretty well, man. I would say I've probably lived my entire life zoomed out.
Golden Retriever standard. Next question.
Well, 2 reasons. I mean, I've said it before. I mean, I'm a Christian, and the way I look at it is like my life here on earth is kind of a blip. There's bigger and better things waiting for me later. So, that's in my mind, that's the ultimate zoomed out perspective. And then the other thing, being a Hornet pilot, I'd argue, at least in the Navy, which Alf, like Bo and stuff, he was pretty sharp on things that I was not. So in the Navy, we were very much 20,000 foot kind of view thing. So, I mean, just kind of like, I don't know, that has always served me well, just the way I try to think as a Christian, and just kind of the community that bred me as a professional pilot. And at the end of the day, I always found that helps with stress, because at the end of the day, right, Mover, that's, all these things you're talking about, the market diving and everything, that with everybody laser focused on a one-day performance, it's just causing a lot of stress, which can affect your whole life.
It cascades. It creates 2 bad days and 3 bad days, and it continues.
Exactly. So, taking a step back, zooming out, it's kind of like, Alpha's talking about radar modes. You step it out to range while search. Sometimes you get the whole picture, and then all of a sudden, boom, you get the essay of what's really going on. And then it's like, okay, it's not that big of a deal. But I mean, other than that, Mover, I mean, you hit the highlights. Alpha, do you have anything to add, man, as far as, hey, just taking a step back when it comes to mental health?
It's the glass half full. It's really easy to get down if you focus on the negative. And my mother taught me this. She's no longer with us, but she was always a positive person. And it's helped me a lot, because I didn't get fighters on my first tour. I was a little bit down about that, but I had a great time as an instructor. I learned a lot about it. And in retrospect, I'm really happy I did that, because it gave me a very solid foundation to be a better fighter pilot afterwards. Other things happen here and there, and I've always been, look, just focus on the positive, and just like Mover said, look at the big picture. Things are not that bad. I know that it's been tough for a lot of people. I mentioned my son's fiance. She spent a lot of time obsessing, because she still has family back in Ukraine, and at one point, I just said, well, Maria, we know it's tough, and there's nothing we can do about it. If you obsess constantly, it's not going to change anything. If you don't obsess and you do your best and be supportive when you talk to them, then that's what you can do for them. So it's, what can you control? What can't you control? And things that I can't control, well, I'm not going to obsess over them. I figure out, just like any good pilot, if this, then what? Then what happens? And then, what is plan B, C, D, and then I'm going to say Z on here just to be Canadian. But, you can be unhappy, or you can be happy, and it just depends on how you choose to be. And I understand, I have friends who have a hard time doing that, but I'm very happy that I'm able to do that. And sometimes it's hard, though, like this period where things are happening kind of all over the world. It's pretty easy to get down, but always stay grounded. Look at your family, your friends, lean on them, do what you can.
Awesome. Alf, you make a good point, not just from mental health, but from a safety perspective. Even in aviation, the mishap in the Everglades, where they basically were focused on a light bulb that essentially was out, like why did the gear not come down, and then missed the big picture of, I mean, they crashed a perfectly good airplane, and it's like, hey, back up a little bit. Don't focus on the one problem, keep living your life, keep flying the plane. So, but yeah, no, that's Doug. What do you think, man?
I think it's a lot harder to do this for me when we have a good guest and I have to follow 3 people instead of just 2.
We'll put you first next time.
Yeah.
No. That's
You'll
not what
lead it off.
Oh boy. I don't know who picked this topic, but this is a really hot topic in mental health. It's something that people have written books about it, and it's always apparently either Mover's reading books or he should be writing them, one or the other. Anyway, I don't know if I've mentioned it on this show. I used to race sailboats in addition to cars, and we more often in sailboats than in cars, but in both of those, somebody always tells somebody else, get your head out of the car, get your head out of the boat. Getting your head out of the boat means, you're focusing too much on what's right in front of you. You're focusing too much on the small picture. And it may be that something's going wrong in your boat right now, but if you're leading the fleet, you got time and you can figure it out. The idea of looking at trends, Mover, when you said that, I was like, this guy used to be my student, which is true. I love going and looking at charts and looking at trends if it's applicable. If something's happening, like with the stock market, just like you said, if that's bothering you, go see if there's data, if there's information. If that means checking in with a friend or a partner, this is like one of the only things that gets easier as you get older. You get more perspective.
More
if somebody's been there with you the whole time, you can say, hey, what happened last time we did this? That's all I got.
Hell yeah. No, that's awesome, man. That's awesome. And we had a couple from the chat that I thought I started. John says, this too shall pass. And it's not Abraham Lincoln. It's obviously Mike Tyson.
Obviously
Mike Tyson. We didn't have any good Gonkyisms tonight. David says, the Mover and Gonky show, one of the best sayings I've heard about life is that the days are long, but the years are short. You got to zoom out when times are hard and zoom in when they're good. I like that.
That is good.
That's a really good, that's a good one there. And then Aaron says, the big picture always gives you best perspective on the state of progress, while the small picture shows you the things you did to make that progress. And I mean, that's you can almost talk about that with leadership too. If you sweat the details and don't let your people handle it, they're going to be very disgruntled, versus if you zoom out and like, okay, my job is to keep the ship from running aground. Let the individual people do what they're going to do, and I'll course correct as necessary. But Colin says, I suffer from anxiety and have a hard time getting away from the what if scenarios. You and everybody else. It's
normal.
It's a real struggle, but the mental health minute sure does help. But I'm still a work in progress. And again, so are we.
Yep.
So am I.
Yep.
John corrected himself and admitted that he might say that. And Bob
Mike
says,
Tyson's so smart.
He really is.
He's so smart.
Bob says, just arrives, have to rewatch North Windsor, aka Detroit, checking in. Alf, you're an awesome guest. Please come back. Bob, have you seen any ZR1s up there? Gary says, don't eat the yellow snow, Mike Tyson.
Dude.
Mike Tyson.
And we're off.
Oh, man.
Alf,
And we're off, yeah.
All right. I just have some rapid fire Canadian questions now.
Uh-oh.
Since we're done with the aviation thing. Have you ever been ice fishing?
Yes. I hate it. It's cold. I don't like fishing in the summer, but I've done it.
For survival, did you have to build an igloo?
White men can't build igloos, I was told.
Cultural appropriation.
That's the first thing that the Inuit tell you when you arrive in Arctic survival. But actually, I only know it secondhand. Don't tell anybody, but I managed to avoid that course.
Wow.
NORAD pilots had to do it, but I managed to avoid it.
Wow.
Okay. Was Operation Canadian Bacon a secret documentary?
We don't talk about that.
Oh, that's awesome.
All right. That's all. Gonky, you got any questions for the Canada?
No.
We hardly ever get to talk to Canadians, so it's like talking to Alf. It's like talking to an alien. I mean, I don't
alien life form. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Alf, we appreciate you being on the show,
man.
This has been awesome. Love your stories. Go buy his book.
Yeah,
for sure. Where is it? Right there. Supersonic Stories.
Alf, you said your next book was coming out maybe at the new year?
That's my plan. It never survives first contact with Kindle.
Yeah, that's true. Kicks it back for formatting error.
Is it just on Kindle, or have you tried draft to digital as well to get it on other formats?
what I did was I started with a guy named Terry Leversedge, who's got a tiny outfit in Ottawa, Ontario called Kestrel Publications, and he's an old maintenance officer. Went through military college a year ahead of me. Retired as a brigadier general. He's published like dozens of books on aviation, but mostly technical stuff. So Terry did some of the editing, the formatting, and everything else, shrunk it down from 310 to 236 pages. And he got it published on his site and printed through a different printer than what Amazon uses. So it was a more expensive printing though. So I went on an Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing, and I spent about 3 weeks banging my head against the keyboard, figured out how it all worked, and managed to create a Kindle and a hard and softcover version.
Perfect.
But it's been a learning process, but I do have a very well advanced Tudor Tales that's in Word right now that's just getting his final pass through. And
that's what's coming out, right? Tudor Tales?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll have to have you back on after that comes out.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
For sure.
I've really enjoyed this. It's been fun getting back into the fighter pilot ambiance again after so many years.
It's therapeutic, isn't it?
Yes. Good for mental health.
Yes, exactly.
Real quick, Aaron says the previous company I recently got laid off from didn't know how to zoom out. They constantly change what they did based on weekly numbers instead of looking at the big picture. It's cost them a lot of time and money.
Yeah.
I would argue that's just called government.
Yeah, I was going to say sounds like a politician.
Yeah.
Do you work for the government?
Yes.
Or an airline? Because that sounds like it could be either. But no, like I said, just to wrap it up, Alf, thanks again, man. It's been
thank you so much.
Honor, pleasure. Love hearing your stories. Come back anytime. We'll talk about topics and your opinion on everything.
Sure.
Awesome.
Don't ask Alf too many things though.
We love your perspective, man.
Okay. Well, thanks, guys. It's been fun.
All right. We'll see you guys. Thanks, everybody, for watching. See you next time.
See you next time.